When we think of the Manhattan Project, we usually think of a great scientific race against time, a defining moment of the 20th century. But that's only half the story. Behind the genius and the geopolitics, there's a much quieter, much more personal story. The story of the incredible human price that was paid to build the atomic bomb. So today, let's look at that hidden cost.
To really get a sense of this thing, let's start with a number, a really big number, $24 billion. That's what the Manhattan Project would cost in today's money. It's just a staggering figure. So what on earth was all that money for?
You got it. All of that money, all that brainpower, all that effort, it was all poured into building a single type of weapon. And here's the kicker. It was done under a level of secrecy that is, frankly, hard to even imagine. How do you even hide something that massive? And, more importantly,
what was the price that you can't measure in dollars? The price paid in health, in conscience, in human lives? That's the real question we're going to dig into.
okay, so first, let's just try to wrap our heads around the sheer size of this secret empire. Calling it a project doesn't really do it justice. It was something else entirely.
I mean, just look at these numbers. We're not talking about a couple of labs here. At its peak, this thing employed about 130,000 people. To put that in perspective, that's like the entire U.S. auto industry at the time. They built 3 whole cities from the ground up in total secret. Places like Oak Ridge and Los Alamos, they were literally not on any map. This wasn't a project, it was a secret nation dedicated to one single goal.
But the scale wasn't just physical. Let's talk about the incredible psychological weight that this project put on the very people who were dreaming it into existence.
So, to keep everything under wraps, the military used this strategy they called compartmentalization. Okay, imagine you're working on a tiny piece of a giant, world-changing puzzle, but you're never allowed to see the picture on the box. You have no idea what it is you're actually building. This created this intense feeling of isolation and, honestly, a lot of anxiety among the scientists. They had huge moral questions, but who could they talk to?
And at the very top of all this pressure was J. Robert Oppenheimer. The weight on his shoulders, it's just unimaginable. He was completely consumed by this terrifying fear that Hitler's Germany would get the bomb first. People who knew him said he was a chain-smoking wreck, barely eating, just running on pure nervous energy, totally consumed by the burden of what he was doing.
You really see that inner turmoil come to a head at the very first test of the bomb. When he saw that fireball light up the desert, he didn't cheer, he didn't celebrate. Instead, he remembered a line from Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Wow, that isn't a statement of victory, that's a confession. He understood right in that moment the terrible force he had brought into the world.
And Oppenheimer wasn't the only one with a heavy conscience. Take the physicist Leo Szilard. He was actually one of the people who kicked this whole thing off, warning Roosevelt about the possibility of a Nazi bomb. But as the project got closer to reality, he had a major change of heart. He started a petition, got 70 other scientists to sign it, basically begging President Truman, please, don't just drop this on a city without any warning. They knew what they had created, and it terrified them.
So, we've seen the burden on the scientists, right? But they at least knew what they were working on. What about the tens of thousands of ordinary people who built the bomb, but had absolutely no idea what they were doing?
This might be one of the most fascinating parts of the whole story. In that secret city of Oak Ridge, the Army went on a hiring spree. They recruited thousands of young women, many of them just out of high school, for a very specific job. Their task was to sit on a stool for hours on end and just watch the needles on these huge control panels. They became known as the Calitron Girls.
They were told their work was vital for the war. That's it, no other details. Their instructions were simple. If the needle on the dial moves over here, you turn this knob. If it moves over there, you turn that other knob. So what was this secret, repetitive task they did all day, every day?
They were enriching uranium. Piece by tiny piece, dial by dial, they were separating the specific uranium isotopes needed to build the bomb that was eventually dropped on Hiroshima. They were at the absolute heart of the atomic age, and all they knew was which knob to turn. It's just incredible.
But this extreme secrecy had some really deadly side effects. You see, workers were handling all kinds of toxic, dangerous materials without any real understanding of the risks. For example, some worked with a metal called beryllium. Inhaling the dust from it can cause a horrible, often fatal lung disease called berylliosis.
And here is the cruelest twist of all. When these workers got sick and went to see a doctor, the
The secrecy rules were so strict, they weren't allowed to tell the doctor what they did for work or what kind of materials they were around all day. So how could a doctor possibly make the right diagnosis? The secrecy that was meant to protect the project ended up being a death sentence for some of its own people.
This circle of impact just keeps getting bigger. We started with the scientists, then the workers, and now we're talking about totally unsuspecting American civilians.
Okay, so it's July 16th, 1945. The world's first atomic bomb goes off in the New Mexico desert. The flash is so bright it's seen for hundreds of miles. So what does the government tell the public? Oh, just a little accident. An ammunition dump blew up. Nothing to worry about. A simple lie to cover up a world-changing truth.
But for the people living in small towns nearby, like Tularosa, something very weird started to happen. This strange white ash began to fall from the sky, coating everything like a blanket of snow. Kids went out and played in it. Nobody had any idea what it was.
Well, that snow was radioactive fallout. It settled on the grass, the cows ate the grass, the radiation got concentrated in their milk, and local families drank that milk. In the years and decades that followed, those communities saw cancer rates and infant mortality go through the roof. But their health records were suppressed by the government for decades. Admitting these people were sick would mean admitting the secret. These people, known as the downwinders, were the first unacknowledged victims of the atomic age.
And that brings us to the project's complicated and frankly troubling legacy. It's a legacy of secrecy that raises some tough questions we still have to deal with today.
What the Manhattan Project really did was establish a new and pretty dangerous idea. That in the name of national security, the health and safety of your own citizens, whether they're workers or just people who live nearby, can be treated as a lower priority. It created a playbook where secrecy could just steamroll transparency. And listen, this isn't just a history lesson. Think about the massive scientific leaps we're making right now. Things like artificial intelligence, genetic engineering. These fields have incredible potential, but they also have huge risks. The story of the Manhattan Project forces us to ask who gets to decide what's safe and who's going to pay the price when those risks are hidden from the public.
In the end, this is the one question that echoes down through the decades, from the shadow of that first mushroom cloud. It's the question that haunted the scientists who built the bomb, and it's a question we have to keep asking ourselves with every new breakthrough. Just because we learn how to do something, does that mean we should